In episode 49, the story begins with a feline that had just arrived on Third Earth. Now, inside the feline were Chitara and Tigra, but now here comes a problem. By the time they arrived in Third Earth, there was a terrible storm. So, Chitara suggested to Tigra to contact Cat's lair right away. So that's what he did. So, meanwhile, in the Cat's lair's control room, we have Lino and Panther that just received a transmission from Tigra in a feliner. Speaking of the feliner, meanwhile there, and along with Chitara and Tigra, things don't look so good for them, because the storm itself is getting worse and worse. In the Catster's control room, Chitara said to Panther and Lionel that there's a problem with the auto navigator of the feliner and it's been burnt out for some reason. So, Lionel was asking Panther a question: can you talk them into landing safely? After Panther had thought about what Lionel said and hearing the bad news from Chitara and the feliner, that's when Panther told Lionel no. And he also said that there's a bigger problem, that there's no way to talk them in. But, according to Panther, he's going to try and do it anyway. So he says, pay attention, feliner. I'm going to try to talk you down. So lock in into my signal, he said. So back with the feliner, it did exactly what Panther said and then locked into a signal from Caslair. So back at the Caslair's control room, that's when Snart told Lionel and Panther the bad news that he couldn't find the Thunderkitterns anywhere. Then Snart told Panther and Lionel that there's a bigger problem. They're outside somewhere in that terrible storm. We gotta go find them, Snart suggested. Calm down, Snarf, Lionel said. We'll find them. Why don't you go on ahead, Panthro suggested. I'll take care of things from the control room, he suggested. So Lionel and Snarf head off to the sword chamber. So that's what they did. So meanwhile, the sword chamber, Lionel does what any good guy would do. Find the Thunderkitterns from his Sword of Omens, of course. But all Lionel could do was see that there's a terrible storm, and he had a thought that the storm is getting worse by the minute. And here's a bigger problem. According to Lionel, there's a force field of some kind that's blocking the sword's eye, so there's no way to tell where the Thunderkitterns are. So Snart panicked and asked Lionel a question: does this mean we'll never find them? They must be out there somewhere, he said. Well, in Snart's case, he's not wrong, because meanwhile in the woods, they're the Thunderkitterns now, and they're trying to get away from that bad storm. But luckily they managed to avoid the tree to when the lightning struck it and set it on fire. And of course, also the good news, the Thunderkins spotted an old suspension capsule. Now remember, that's the same suspension capsule when the ship fell apart just 48 episodes ago. So they thought, why not seek some shelter in air? So that's what they did. So now that they're inside the capsule, that's when Wiley Kid just told her brother, we better let Kessler know where we are. But there's a problem. He just let slip to his sister that he forgot his communicator, but luckily for Wiley Kid, she at least brought hers. I spelled bad luck, Wiley Cat said. Panther's gonna punish us if he finds out we've been wandering off. As a matter of fact, Wiley Kid says, when it's her turn to let slip to her brother, that they deserve this punishment anyway. Since unfortunately Wiley Cat's communicator isn't working, so Wiley Cat suggested for her to go outside. But there's a bigger problem. They couldn't open the capsule. So in other words, they're trapped. So Wiley Cat communicated with Cat's lair. So meanwhile, at Castle Plundar's control room, receiving the transmission was Bolterman. So Lionel says, what happened? Where are you? Well, we got bad news, Wiley Kid said. We're trapped in an old suspension capsule, she said. So back at Kessler, Lionel just realizes that the transmission had been lost. So Snart panicked and says, oh dear, now we'll never find out where they are, he said. So meanwhile, back at the Castle Plunder's control room, that's when Sly, the leader of the mutants, was asking Voltron, so what's going on? What's important about this message? And it better be good, he said. So Voltron says, oh, it is good, and something even better. The Thunderkins are trapped in an old suspension capsule, he said. Of course, what's even more better, according to what Volterman says on the map, he knows where it is. That's a perfect opportunity, don't you agree? Volterman asked. As a matter of fact, like the leader of the mutants said, this is a great opportunity. For once, you're really on to something, he said. So Jackalman went next to speak in his case to say there's a problem. There's no way for a skycutter to get there with all this terrible storm that's going on. But Monkey and told Slide that there's a better suggestion to have Slide take the nosediver instead. So after listening to Monkey and suggestion, that's when Volterman says all you have to do is just hold the capsule right here at this castle, Volterman said. So Monkey, who agrees with Volterman's suggestion, he says what better way to take care of the Thunderkitterns ourselves. And why is that? Because as anyone will tell you, that's all part of the plan. So meanwhile back at Castellarius, the storm itself continues to get worse and worse as for Lionel and Snarf to head towards the Thunder Tank. So what Snarf wanted to know how they're going to find the Thunder Kittens. Well, Lionel, however, has a hunch. He told Snarf that if the hunch was correct, if the Thunderkins are inside of the old suspension capsule, that means the capsule itself is not too far away from the crash site itself. So now that there's no time to lose, all that Snarf and Lionel had to do is just get there. But unfortunately, on the tank's way out, something just damaged the claw of Cat's lair. So unfortunately, the Thunder Tank is stuck and ejected both Lionel and Snarf out of the tank. If that's not bad enough, the Cat's lair's drawbridge is out. So back with Lionel, he had no luck of getting the Thunder Tank out, so it's stuck at the moment. So Snarf now is feeling depressed, and he says, "Oh boy, I just hope the others are having better luck than we are." Back in the Kessler's control room, all by himself, is Panthro. He's trying to guide the Feeliner that has Chitara and Tigra in it. So speaking of the Feeliner that has Chitara and Tigra, they're not having much luck. And of course things are looking bad. So Chitara was asking Panthro to repeat the coordinates because for some reason the storm has gotten so bad that they couldn't make it out. Things were looking bad for the feliner up above, but not so much for the Thunderkittens, which, unfortunately, back with them, they're still stuck in the suspension capsule. Now, don't panic, Kid said to her brother. Stay calm. I'm sure someone will come for us. Then the Thunderkittens just heard a noise that's coming from outside. But what they didn't realize is that the sound is from the nosediver. Now remember, the nosediver that was driven by Sly, the leader of the Moons, who just left the castle moments ago, and he's doing what Volterman said to do. So back with Sly, he looked inside of the capsule to look at the Thunderkins for a while. So the kids couldn't help but wonder what was Sly doing here. So after Slide hooks up the old suspension capsule to the tow line that connects to the nosediver, what Slide did is that he took the old capsule to Castle Plondar. So long story short, Slide, the leader of the mutants, and on the nosediver, and of course towing the capsule that has the kittens inside, they have finally arrived at Castle Plondar. So back with Slide, the leader of the mutants, now that everybody's in the castle, including the Thunderkins that's still stuck inside of the suspension capsule at the moment. So what the three mutants are doing is that they're going to open up the capsule. Things are looking bad for the Thunderkittens. But what the mutants didn't know is that watching it happen was Mumra in his tomb chamber in the Black Pyramid, and he got upset. And then he pleaded his case to say if he had his plan, he'll use the Thunderkittens that's trapped in the suspension capsule as bait to lure Lionel for a trap. So that's what he's planning to do. So, what Mumra does any bad guy would do, just like what he always does, change into his monstrous form, with a little help from his spirits of evil, of course, and once that was finished, he flew himself out of the pyramid and he's on his way to Castle Plondar. So back at Castle Plondar with the mutants, that's when they looked over their shoulders, they saw that Mum Ra had appeared out of nowhere. So what Mumra did is that he pleaded his case to the mutants to say, I will take that capsule. That is, of course, if you don't have any objections. So Sly, the leader of the mutants, has his turn to plead a case to tell Mumra to stay out of it. Really? Mumra said. So you dare to challenge me? He asked. So the first thing Mumra did was to use his powers against all the mutants, Sly's the leader, Jackalman, and Monkeyan. That was until when Slides got into the nosediver, he fights back at Mumra. So long story short, while the battle continues to go on between Mumra and the mutants, back with the feliner, as Panther tries to contact the feliner the best way he knew how, from the Kessler's control room. Well, good news for Tiger, he manages to put the booster rockers on for the feliner. So also the good news, the feliner is now back in control. But unfortunately for the Fieliner, there's bad news. The engine's boosters didn't last very long. Back in the control room, Lionel and Snarf wanted to know from Panthro what is going on. Well, according to Panthro, he said that there's a problem with the communications. It just went down. And if something isn't done fast, according to Panthro, and if he couldn't talk the Fieliner in, then this can mean a serious disaster, and that means the Fieliner's going to crash. But then, aha, Snarf said to Lionel that he has a suggestion. Why not use the Eye of Thunder to guide them in? So Lionel, who listens to Snarf's suggestion, he does what any good guy would do. Use the Thundercat signal from his sword. So that's what he did. Back with Chitara and Tigra that were in the Feliner at the moment, they saw the Thundercat signal. So you know what this means. Snarf's plan worked. So, you know what this means. Thanks to the Eye of Thundera from Lionel's sword, of course, the Feliner was guided in. So meanwhile, in the Castellar's hangar, also the good news is that the Feliner had led it safe and intact. So back with Lionel, Snarf, and Panther, who had just left the control room, they not only are glad to see that Tigra and Chitara had made it out safe. So after Tigra had thanked Panther for doing what he needed to do, that's when Chitara sensed that something was wrong. So Lionel asked her what happened. Well, according to Chitara, she says that her sixth sense had told her that there's something going on with Wily Kid and Wily Cat. Now remember, they were still stuck in the suspension capsule. And here's a bigger problem. According to Chitara, she says that by now they're at Castle Plondar. And let's not forget, Mumra was also there. But unfortunately for Lionel and the Thundercats, they didn't realize is that thanks to that storm, the Thunder Tank is stuck. And the drawbridge has been out. And according to Snarf, he wanted to know from the Thundercats how are they going to get that Thunder Tank out of there. Well, Tiger had an idea. Why not have some thermal charges on the weak parts of the claw so that way the tank will be set free? But Panther said that's not a bad idea, but there's a problem. They could risk blowing up the Thunder Tank too. But then again, according to what Panther says, maybe this is the only way. Then we don't have a choice, Lionel says. We'll have to take that chance anyway. So that's exactly what they did. Once the thermal charges was all set up, well, good news for the Thunder Tank has now been set free. Well, almost, because at first Nar said it didn't work, but then Tiger said it did. Well, according to Lino, here comes the bigger problem. How are they going to get across that moat with that drawbridge out? Well, it's going to take every ounce of strength that the Thunder Tank could get, so they'll have to chance their way to get across somehow. So everybody went into the tank. So after Panther was first to get into the tank, after Lionel had told Chitara that he's not so sure if that plan of jumping across that chasm after the bridge was out was going to work. So what Panther did is he puts in every ounce of power that the Thunder Tank's got. And then after that, well, good news for the Thunder Tank, it's finally been set free thanks to Panther. And once everybody else is out of the tank, so all the Thundercats can do is just cross their fingers and hope they make it across. Finally, the good news is that the Thunder King have made it across. And despite a minor setback on the way, it finally made it out of the chasm in just in the nick of time. Also, the good news is that the storm is finally over. So now all the Thundercats has to do is get to Castle Plondar. But unfortunately, By the time that the Thundercats had arrived at the castle, someone has already gotten the capsule and is about to leave, and that someone was Mumra himself. Long story short, after Chitara, the Thundercats had found out that Mumra had just flew past them, so Lionel told Chitara that they had to follow him, and so they did. Back with Mumra, who was still having a suspension capsule under his arm, he had no idea that he was being pursued by the Thundercats in the Thunder Tank. So while the Thunder Tank is still in pursuit of Mumra, Lionel has a plan. He uses the claw line from his claw shield, of course, to hook himself against Mumra's cape. So both of them head to the Black Pyramid where Mumra lives. So meanwhile there, Mumra was the first there to arrive, and so was Lionel, who was still behind him. But unfortunately, by the time that Monroe turns around, he makes Lionel fall to the ground without his claw line. But luckily for Lionel, he landed safely on the ground. So now that Monroe is face to face with Lionel and with the suspension capsule, Lionel knows what to do. As any good guy would do, he summons the Thundercat signal from his sword. So that's what he did. The Thunderkitterns, unfortunately, that were still stuck in the suspension capsule at the moment, they were first to see the signal. Back at the Thunder Tank, we have Panther, Chitara, Tiger, and Snarf. They were next to see the signal, so they're now on their way. But in the meantime, back at the Black Pyramid, it's now just Lionel and Mon-Ra having a combat with each other, so they went on for a battle. So long story short, as the battle between Mumra and Lionel just went on and on and on and on and on, that's when Mumra pleaded his case with Lionel to say that this time he's going to be doomed. The Thunderkins panicked because unfortunately they're still stuck in a suspension capsule, so Wily Kid told his sister, "We gotta do something about it." "But how are we gonna help him?" his sister asked. But then, aha, Wily Kid has a plan. So she gives her brother her pellet and said this should help a lot. So, back with Mumra and Lionel still battling on and on and on and on and on. So, long story short, things are looking bad for Lionel after he was disarmed thanks to Mumra, and after Mumra pleaded his case with Lionel to say that neither he or his sword could stand a chance against him, but on the contrary, by the time that Mumra went towards the capsule, that's when luckily for the Thunderkins, they have a plan. Remember that capsule that Wily Cat took and put it into his mouth? Guess what he did? He blew a bubble. And guess what Mom Ross saw the moment he looked at the bubble? His own reflection. So yes, you've heard right. The Thunderkins' plan worked. So Momo was scared to death because of his own reflection. So back with Monroe, after he was defeated by his own reflection, he went back into the tomb chamber of his own pyramid. He then pleaded himself a case to say that this day belongs to the Thundercats. But according to Monroe, he says that next time he will be back. And according to what Monroe also said, that Lionel wouldn't be so lucky either. So outside of the pyramid, as soon as the Thunder Tank shows up, well, let's just say that the Thunderkins had it all under control because according to Lionel, he just told their friends that as this time they are the heroes, so they deserve the credit. Well, in Lionel's case, he's not wrong, but then Chitara pleads her case to say there's a lesson to learn from all of this. You're not really trapped until you really stop trying. Now, Panthro, who agrees with Chitara, he says, "Well, what do you say we go home and try to get the Thunderkins out of that capsule?" he suggested. And so everyone left the pyramid and head back to Cat's lair. So, back at Cat's lair, but this time in the meeting room, that's when Lionel told Panthro that there's gotta be a way. But there's a problem, according to what Panthro said when his turn to speak in his case. There has to be a way without harming Wily Kid and Wily Cat. So after Lionel had heard it from Panthro, he says, "Well, you're right, this is a problem." "We gotta do something to get them out of there," Snarf suggested. "We're thinking about it," Tiger said, but when Wily Kid was asking the question if they're going to be trapped in there until they're growing old. So Chitara thought about an idea, but then she says, "Nah, forget it. Never mind," because she was worried that she'll freeze Wily Kid and Wily Cat. So Tiger suggested to use the cutting tool, but only setting it on low. But Panther says that that wouldn't work either. Now Lionel is getting worried and he says we gotta do something before they run out of air. But then Snarf pleaded his case to ask a question. Has anybody had an idea about kicking the capsule? But then Lionel dismissed him and says, "Come on, Snarf, this is a serious situation here." But then Snarf, although as crazy as it seems, he had a hunch. Why not use his tail to whack the capsule open instead? So that's what he did. So finally, the suspension capsule opened. So good news, the kittens are free at last, thanks to Snarf and his tail, of course. So now that the Thunderkitterns are free at last, thanks to Snarf, that's when Lionel told Snarf, "Do me a favor. The next time you're trapped in a capsule like this, just as the Thunderkittens did, remind me to listen to you." Well, Snarf was more than happy to do just that. So that ends episode 49.